Most people wouldn't give her a second glance, and that was exactly what Evelyn Thomas counted on when she walked into Liora Fine Jewelry just after opening. No assistant, no entourage, no high-end fashion labels. Just a soft trench coat, leather flats, and a quiet confidence. She looked like someone searching for a modest gift, maybe a birthday necklace or a charm bracelet. No one would have guessed she was the majority shareholder in the company, or that she had come here today because of a troubling pattern. Reports from other locations had been handled quickly, but this store number 19, kept coming up. Emails about rude treatment, assumptions about customer income, subtle discouragements meant to keep the wrong kind of buyer from staying too long. So Evelyn came unannounced, like she always did when she needed the truth. The moment she stepped inside, she felt it. The slight glance from the woman behind the counter, the way the conversation stopped between two clerks, and most of all, the pause, subtle but unmistakable, when the manager walked out from the back office, took one look at Evelyn, and offered a smile that never reached her eyes. "Just browsing?" she asked, not even pretending to be welcoming. Evelyn nodded. She had no intention of making a scene. She just wanted to see if the rumors were true. She slowly walked past the cases, observing more than the diamonds. Body language, eye contact, tone of voice. She had spent her career teaching staff how to treat people like people, not like problems. But here, something was off. A young couple walked in after her, dressed in tailored suits, and suddenly the room came alive. "Welcome in. Can I show you our emerald collection?" Evelyn wasn't surprised, but she was disappointed. She took a quiet breath and kept walking. What the staff didn't know was that they were being watched by the one person who could change everything, and they were already failing the test. 8 hours earlier, Evelyn had been seated at her usual corner table at the rooftop cafe across from her corporate building. She wasn't there for breakfast, just a coffee, her tablet, and a spreadsheet full of customer feedback. She scanned each line carefully, highlighting recurring language. Dismissive tone, felt unwelcome, staff didn't approach, treated like I couldn't afford it. Over and over one store number appeared. Number 19. Liora Fine Jewelry was supposed to feel personal, approachable. It was the only reason she had invested in the brand to begin with. But what she was reading sounded more like a private club guarding its image than a company that sold moments and meaning. She didn't believe in issuing memos. She believed in showing up. So she closed her tablet, paid in cash, and walked 3 blocks in silence. No calls to HR, no message to the district manager. Evelyn wanted to see the place before anyone had time to adjust their behavior. She'd done this before, twice in other cities. And both times, what she found matched the warnings. She hoped this time would be different. The store wasn't crowded, just 2 employees prepping displays and low jazz echoing off glass and marble. From the outside, everything looked elegant. But she didn't care about presentation. She was here to read people, every hesitation, every sideways glance, every sentence that sounded polite but meant the opposite. She wore neutral colors on purpose. Left her jewelry at home. She didn't want recognition. She wanted reality. And reality so far was confirming everything she feared. By the time she reached the middle of the showroom, she already knew enough. The warmth was performative. The silence was selective. The assumptions were automatic. And none of it had anything to do with service. It had everything to do with what they thought she wasn't. Evelyn paused near the sapphire section, pretending to examine a cluster ring she'd personally approved for last year's winter catalog. It hadn't sold well, but she'd always liked its asymmetry. Now, it served a different purpose. Cover. A reason to stand still and listen. 2 clerks had resumed their conversation nearby, voices low, but not low enough. "She's just browsing," one said with a tone that carried both dismissal and decision. "Probably just wasting time," the other replied with a laugh that wasn't cruel, just careless. as if Evelyn's presence didn't require full attention because her shoes didn't gleam and her earrings didn't sparkle. That was the part that always hit hardest. Not the offense, but the ease with which it was given. She moved on, walking slowly past a row of tennis bracelets arranged like a gallery of acceptable wealth. The lighting was perfect, the product curation flawless. But under it all, she could feel the rot, the quiet sorting of customers into categories, not by need or taste, but by surface. A woman stepped in behind her wearing a silk scarf and heels that probably cost more than Evelyn's entire outfit. Within seconds, a young employee detached from a side conversation and approached with a warmth that hadn't been offered to anyone else all morning. "Welcome to Liora. Can I offer you a personal tour of our premium pieces?" Evelyn didn't flinch. She didn't need to. Every moment was confirming what she already suspected. Training wasn't the problem. Culture was, and culture starts at the top. She let her fingers drift across the glass one last time before stepping away. She didn't need to linger. She had seen what she came to see, and more importantly, what the staff had failed to see. That perception shapes behavior. That courtesy isn't something you save for those you assume will spend. As she reached the end of the showroom, one of the younger clerks finally approached. "Is there anything in particular you're looking for today?" The tone was rehearsed, hesitant, like a line read too late in a play that had already ended. Evelyn smiled gently and shook her head. "Not anymore," she said. Then she turned, walked toward the exit, and left the store exactly the way she had entered, unnoticed by the people who should have known better. Outside, the wind had picked up slightly, tugging at the edge of Evelyn's trench coat as she stepped out onto the sidewalk. She didn't stop walking, didn't look back, but her mind was already piecing together the next steps. Store number 19 wasn't just an isolated issue, it was a symptom, and symptoms always pointed to something deeper, something systemic. By the time she reached the end of the block, she'd mentally drafted the beginning of a leadership audit. Not a reprimand, a reset. Because this wasn't about firing a few sales associates or sending out a new training video. This was about what the brand had started to become when no one thought the founder was watching. Back at headquarters, her name was on every wall. Her face had once been in every campaign, but what she'd just witnessed made one thing clear. Respect couldn't be printed into a poster or stitched into a mission statement. It had to be practiced, every customer, every day, no exceptions. She thought of the younger associate, hesitant, unsure, but not unkind. That one might be worth keeping. The others, time would tell. But it wouldn't take long. Evelyn had no patience for decor polished over decay. If something needed tearing out, she'd do it cleanly. Quietly, but completely. She reached for her phone as she crossed the street. A message to the regional director was already forming. Nothing dramatic, just a request. "Meet me at 19 tomorrow morning. Don't announce it." That was her style. No scenes, just accountability. Inside the store, she knew they'd already moved on. Another customer would walk in, someone who looked right, and the charm would return. The warmth, the curated version of luxury they thought was enough. But Evelyn knew better. She didn't build Liora to be exclusive. She built it to be extraordinary, for anyone. And if anyone on her team had forgotten that, they were about to be reminded. The jewelry would stay. The cases, the lights, the velvet trays, they weren't the problem. But the silence, that was about to be broken. When Evelyn reached the final diamond display, she let her gaze linger, not on the pieces themselves, but on the faint reflection of her own face in the glass. No jewelry, no makeup, no symbols of status. Just a woman watching the brand she helped build quietly forget what it was meant to stand for. She wasn't angry, not yet, but she was awake. And that was more dangerous. Behind her, the low hum of conversation resumed. Two associates stood near a promotional case, casually discussing inventory like she wasn't there. They weren't being cruel. That would have been easier to address. No, this was subtler, something colder, a quiet calculation of who deserved attention and who didn't. And Evelyn, today, in these shoes and that coat, was marked irrelevant. She turned slowly and continued walking, letting her fingers glide over the edge of a velvet tray holding stud earrings. No approach, no engagement, just air-conditioned distance. She didn't need surveillance footage or secret recordings. She was living the customer experience they thought no one would notice. But she wasn't just a customer. She was the one with the ledger. Near the sapphire rings, she paused again. This time not to observe the jewelry, but to study a pair of employees whispering near the checkout. "She's just browsing," one said with a quick glance in her direction. The other nodded, barely interested. They weren't rude, but they were wrong. Evelyn had built Liora to never sound like that, to never dismiss quietly and smile publicly. Somewhere along the way, that principle had slipped. It wasn't the first time, but it would be the last. Evelyn stepped toward the main corridor leading to the exit. Her walk was measured, deliberate, each step drawing a conclusion. The store's polish couldn't hide its erosion. The velvet, the scent, the symmetry, it was all surface. And culture was never about surface. It lived in tone, in instincts, in the silence between words. At the far end of the store, she caught sight of a younger associate helping an elderly woman with a clasp. Gentle hands, warm tone, no rush, no bias. That moment mattered. Evelyn memorized the name on the associate's tag, because when the dust settled, some things, some people, were still worth keeping. She didn't look back as she stepped out into the wind. But her next move was already forming. A call would go out. Quiet. Direct. "Meet me at store 19, tomorrow morning. Don't announce it." It wouldn't be dramatic. It would be decisive. Because Evelyn hadn't come today to be seen. She had come to see. And what she saw demanded a response. The diamonds would stay. The decor, the displays, the music. They weren't the problem. The silence was. And that silence, it was about to be broken. That night, Evelyn sat in the quiet of her study, the city humming beyond the window like an orchestra playing the same tired song. The lights of downtown bled into the glass, blurred and blinking, but her eyes didn't register the skyline. They were fixed on nothing and everything all at once. What she'd witnessed that morning, so routine in its subtlety, so practiced in its execution, wasn't new. It was simply confirmed, and confirmation, she knew, carried a weight deeper than suspicion. She had poured herself a half glass of Syrah, velvety, dry, unshowy, and left it untouched beside a stack of old catalog proofs. The irony wasn't lost on her. Page after page of carefully styled elegance, expressions curated to imply inclusivity, captions that spoke of meaning and connection, of moments for every woman. She had written those words once, or something close, and today she'd seen how easily words could be made decorative, severed from the behavior they were supposed to inspire. The problem, she realized, wasn't training. It wasn't even attitude. It was something more ambient, more dangerous. Culture, once ignored, became air. Breathed in unconsciously, accepted unconsciously, passed on unconsciously. She opened her laptop, the screen's glow casting harsh shadows across her face, and began drafting an internal memo. Not a condemnation, not yet, but a precursor. Something to mark the start of a reckoning. Her fingers moved slowly, deliberately, pausing often, not because she lacked words, but because each sentence had to do two things: reflect reality and resist comfort. The title came last. Internal Alignment, Store 19 and Beyond. It would go out tomorrow, quietly. But when it landed, it would signal the end of something, the end of casual exclusion, of sales floor gatekeeping, of a system that had confused luxury with hierarchy and warmth with favor. Evelyn closed the laptop without sending the draft. Not yet. Not tonight. Timing mattered. Silence, she'd learned, could be strategic, but only if it wasn't the final move. She rose, walked slowly to the tall windows, and pressed her palm against the cool glass. Below, the city pulsed with its late-night rhythm. Headlights crawling in long ribbons, neon flickers advertising promises as hollow as they were bright. Strangers moving quickly through rain-speckled sidewalks. Somewhere down there, she knew, another customer would soon step into one of her stores and be judged not by curiosity or need, but by fabric, jewelry, and posture. Reduced to appearances. Reduced to nothing. It wasn't anger that held her in place, but something heavier. A sense of betrayal. Liora was supposed to be the opposite of this. She and her partners had built it not as a vault for the elite, but as a sanctuary where elegance was paired with dignity. And yet here it was. Elegance without soul. On the credenza behind her lay old photographs, black and white shots from the company's first boutique opening. She glanced at one. Evelyn herself, barely 30, hair pulled back, standing behind a glass case filled with only 12 modest pieces. She remembered what she had said that day. We sell more than beauty, we sell belonging. Now, decades later, she felt those words sliding back toward myth. She took a slow breath and turned back to her desk. She didn't need theatrics. She didn't need speeches. What she needed was precision. A scalpel, not a hammer. Tomorrow, she would deliver it. And the day after that. She would keep cutting away the rot until only truth remained. By morning, the memo had been sent. Not wide, but deep. A select thread of names, department heads, senior operations, regional leadership. No slogans, no lofty visions, no PR spin. Just one sentence carved like a blade. If service depends on the customer's appearance, then it's not service. It's theater. And we're not in the business of performance. The reaction was immediate, but not public. Slack channels froze mid-sentence. Meetings turned tense. Whispered texts crossed departments like nervous sparks. Who had been mentioned? Who hadn't? What did Evelyn know? And what was still hidden? The silence she created became its own storm. She didn't chase it. She let it build. Because she knew the truth. Culture doesn't change through applause. It changes through unease. And unease was finally spreading. When Evelyn arrived at store 19 the next morning, it was 9:58 a.m. sharp. This time she wore no trench, no polished coat. Just simple denim, a plain crew neck, and her hair tied back. She didn't come to be recognized. She came to be unmistakable. The manager was already at the door, cheeks pale, posture stiff. Someone had clearly warned her. Evelyn didn't pause to confirm. She didn't exchange pleasantries. She gave a short nod and stepped inside like someone who owned the ground she walked on. Because she did. The atmosphere was different now. The curated calm from the day before had evaporated into brittle air, taut with anticipation. Associates adjusted trays nervously, backs a little straighter, smiles a little too quick. Within seconds, one stepped forward, offering a line rehearsed overnight. "Welcome to Liora. How can we help you today?" Evelyn let the words wash over her like background music. She knew it wasn't real. Not yet. It was fear speaking, not presence. But fear, at least, was a response. And a response was the first step toward awareness. What I love about this moment in the story is that Evelyn doesn't act loudly. She doesn't stand on a stage or deliver a speech. She moves quietly, but in a way that makes the silence ring louder than words. She understands something essential. Culture in a company doesn't shift because of top-down orders. It shifts when people start to feel discomfort, when they're forced to see themselves from the outside. That's the power of her approach. And honestly, I think this kind of leadership is something we're missing far too often in real life. It's easy to talk about values in glossy presentations, but it's much harder to make people live those values in the small, everyday moments. Evelyn reminds us that respect isn't proven in a commercial. It's proven in how you treat the person you think doesn't matter. And that truth applies not just to business, but to life itself. She walked the floor again. Same cases, same lighting. But now the air was tense, brittle. The curated calm of the day before had been replaced by a murmur of anticipation. Eyes followed her, but not with dismissal, with awareness, which meant the first wall had cracked. Denial. In the back office, she sat across from the store's leadership team, 5 people in crisp neutrals who suddenly seemed very small in a room that wasn't. She didn't ask questions. She presented facts, customer feedback, direct quotes, timelines, tone descriptions. Her voice remained level, her gaze steady. It was not an interrogation. It was an inventory. And what she was counting wasn't mistakes. It was patterns. The word she used most often was consistency, not kindness, not empathy, consistency. Because that was the real measure of culture, how people behaved when they thought they were right, not when they were watched, not when they were trained, but when they believed no one who mattered was watching. She ended the meeting with a statement, not a warning. Every customer is someone who matters. Starting today, every employee will behave like that's true, or they won't be here next month. And with that she stood. There was no applause, no outrage, just silence. And Evelyn preferred it that way, because silence now after truth wasn't absence. It was absorption, the kind that doesn't erupt, but echoes. By the end of the week, 3 team members had been quietly reassigned. A district audit was underway. But more importantly, the new language had started to spread. Presence over polish, behavior over branding. The jewelry remained unchanged. But what glimmered more brightly now, what Evelyn would always insist on, was not the product. It was the principle. That principle echoed in every memo, every meeting, every new hire brief that followed. Evelyn didn't just restore the standard, she raised it. Liora Fine Jewelry wasn't going to be a brand that merely looked welcoming. It would become welcoming, deeply, authentically, and irreversibly. Not through press releases or polished branding, but through everyday choices. Who gets mentored? Who feels valued? Who gets seen? The lighting might catch someone's eye, but only humanity keeps them coming back. Evelyn understood that deeply. And now, every team member with a Liora name tag would too. She had entered store 19 alone and unnoticed. She wouldn't have to again, because presence wasn't missing anymore, and the culture had finally come home. And yet Evelyn knew this was bigger than a single store or even a single company. The truth was universal. Respect is either practiced in small moments or it is lost altogether. Every welcome spoken with sincerity, every gesture of patience, every refusal to judge too quickly, those were the real diamonds. The ones that could not be displayed in a glass case but lived in the way people felt after leaving. Liora's revival became a reminder that businesses don't succeed on products alone. They succeed on presence. A necklace can sparkle, but dignity outshines gold. Evelyn carried that conviction with her long after the meetings ended, long after the culture reset had begun. It wasn't about legacy anymore. It was about leadership, the kind that doesn't just ask for excellence, but embodies it in silence, in choices, in the courage to demand better. Because when warmth is consistent, when care is unconditional, when no one is made invisible, a store becomes more than a store. It becomes what it was always meant to be. A place where people matter. And that is a standard worth protecting, not just in retail but everywhere. I believe stories like this matter because they reflect something bigger than retail. They speak to how we treat each other when no one's watching, and how easily warmth can be lost when we stop choosing it. This is a fictional story. Any resemblance to real people, places, or events is purely coincidental. If this story made you pause, share it. If you've ever felt overlooked in a space meant to welcome you, leave a comment. And if this kind of storytelling resonates, hit like and subscribe. More is coming. My personal thoughts. When I think about Evelyn's story, I realize it's not just about jewelry or luxury. It's about the everyday spaces we all walk into: stores, offices, classrooms, even homes. Too often, people are measured by how they look, what they wear, or what others assume they can offer. And the danger is how casual that judgment becomes, how invisible it feels to those giving it, and how heavy it feels to those receiving it. That's why this story resonates with me. It's a reminder that respect doesn't cost anything, but it can mean everything. And maybe that's the real standard we should all be holding ourselves to, no matter where we are.